I've always watched YouTube videos about infidelity for entertainment, never thinking I'd end up in a similar situation. But here I am, in a mess I never saw coming. It all started when an unusual envelope arrived in the mail. There was no return address, and it had two stamps in the upper right corner. The handwritten address made me think it might be from an old military buddy trying to reconnect. When I opened it, the letter inside was addressed to Mr. Unknown, a name I'm using here instead of my real one. The letter read, "Dear Mr. Unknown, I'm sending you this anonymous letter to let you know that your wife has been having an affair with Mr. Boss Man, who is involved with multiple women." I read that letter several times. The author remained anonymous, but clearly wanted me to know that my wife was having an affair with her supervisor. Mentioning multiple women suggested he was involved with more than one woman. I'd seen her supervisor once when I dropped her off at work. He was a tall guy, about 6'4", bald, below average in looks, and out of shape, kind of like a heavier golem. Knowing my wife's type, he didn't fit it. To give some background, during my time in the military, I focused on endurance training. About 6 months before leaving, I started lifting weights because I was tired of feeling fatigued. I gained 20 pounds of muscle, and though it might sound conceited, my appearance improved significantly. However, at 5'9", I never saw myself as a Don Juan. With my new physique, I did notice more attention from women. They would check me out discreetly, and one of my wife's friends even showed subtle interest. My wife, being the jealous type, never seemed to notice. As a religious person, I never took advantage of these opportunities or flaunted them to boost my ego. I didn't flirt or have affairs, it was just a confidence boost. Her only comment was, "If your neck disappears, you need to stop," which I found a bit underwhelming, but made me believe she loved me for who I was, not just my body. Returning to the letter, I took it with a grain of salt since there was no concrete evidence. Confronting my wife wouldn't help because if she denied it, what could I do? I lacked proof, and if there really wasn't an affair, confronting her without evidence would drive it underground. Voicing my suspicions would make her think I didn't trust her. What if I was mistaken? I needed solid evidence. Here's some context about us. I'm 35 and my wife is 33. We met in college and got married shortly after. I enlisted in the military, and during our time together, we had 3 kids, a 9-year-old boy and 2 girls, aged 7 and 5. My wife was a stay-at-home mom, taking care of our children. I was confident she remained faithful throughout my military service. We had a great group of friends who supported her when I was deployed. Contrary to the stereotype of cheating spouses during deployments, it's hard to keep such things hidden, though it does happen. To cut a long story short, I was rarely home during my last posting, and as I advanced in rank, it was only going to get worse. So, after serving for 10 years, I decided to leave the military to be a more present father for my children. I hadn't spent much time with them before, and had never changed a diaper. My wife wasn't thrilled about my decision. She doesn't handle uncertainty well, and felt comfortable with the life we built in the military, despite complaining about my frequent absences. Now that I was no longer in the military, she gave me a long list of demands about where we should live, how much money I needed to earn, and other factors to ensure security for her and our kids. She cried a lot during this period. Everyone knows you have to go where the job opportunities are, but I did my best to meet her criteria. We were incredibly fortunate. I fulfilled all her requirements, secured a job in the right state within driving distance of my parents, who she loves, and earned a significant income in the 6 figures. We lived in an area with excellent public schools and low homeowner association fees, where everyone was polite. She had always complained about not being able to start her career because we moved so frequently in the military. She expressed a desire to use her degree in logistics and supply chain management. Within 3 months of job searching, she landed her dream job at a distribution center, where all her colleagues were women and they reported to a male supervisor, the bald guy I mentioned earlier. While her job didn't pay much, it was what she wanted. It was her first job since college, and I supported her 100% in pursuing this opportunity. Since receiving that letter, I've been trying to gather evidence to confirm its authenticity. If someone wanted to expose her boss, why didn't they report it to HR? Why tell me instead? I kept a close eye on my wife. I knew her cell phone password and checked her messages. I found texts with her boss, but their conversations were pretty ordinary, and they didn't text much. The letter bothered me for almost a week, but I couldn't find any proof of her being unfaithful. She's been at her job for 5 months now, and the only noticeable change is our intimacy has decreased. She's been turning down sex for the past 2 months, but I can't accuse her of cheating just because she's not in the mood. She constantly had excuses. Her job was more stressful, or she felt too tired. After 2 weeks of searching for evidence, I found nothing, but I stayed alert for any clues. I often thought about the letter's sender and even considered it might be a prank. At one point, I almost mentioned it to my wife as a joke but decided against it. I was ready to accept that our intimacy might not be as frequent as before and move on. One night, however, my wife mentioned how her female coworkers were jealous of the attention she was getting from her boss. She bragged about receiving the best quarterly reviews and being named Employee of the Month 3 times in her short tenure. She was genuinely thrilled about the recognition, and initially I was happy for her. This was her first real job, after all. But that letter kept gnawing at me. Her statement piqued my curiosity. Could one of her coworkers be so envious that they sent me that letter? Why were they so jealous of her recognition? It seemed a bit extreme. Suspicion crept back in, and I thought about hiring a private investigator. However, I decided against it, not wanting to waste money if I was wrong. I had no concrete evidence, just that mysterious letter, her decreased interest in intimacy, and her newfound job enthusiasm. It all seemed pretty normal, right? So I bought a GPS tracker online to install in her car, hoping to monitor any unusual places she might visit. The tracker fit easily into the OBD port beneath the steering column. Though visible, I figured my wife, not being very tech-savvy, wouldn't notice it. If she did, I could always claim it was for car maintenance. I wouldn't recommend this type of tracker for covert operations, but it was all I had. On Friday, eager to see what the GPS would reveal, I noticed her car was parked in an unfamiliar location. It wasn't her workplace, the grocery store, or our kids' school. It was on the other side of town, a place we rarely visited. I Googled the location and found it was a hotel. I immediately asked my boss for permission to leave work and headed toward the GPS location, about 35 minutes away. 25 minutes into the drive, with only 10 minutes left, I noticed the GPS signal moving away. Tracking it on my phone, I sped up, but saw the signal heading back toward her workplace. Her car had been at that location for 3 hours, and I had just missed her. Disappointed, I got out of my car and looked around, trying to figure out if her car had been at the Best Eastern Hotel or the nearby restaurant. Maybe she was out with coworkers, but it seemed odd for her to drive this far for a restaurant when there were plenty of options closer. It's not like she was a huge fan of Golden Corral, willing to drive 27 miles for a meal. I went home with more questions than answers. My wife noticed my mood and asked what was wrong. I lied, saying I had a tough day at work. I avoided confronting her, feeling I lacked the evidence. So I decided to hire a private investigator because I couldn't keep leaving work to track her down. On Saturday, I found a private investigator on Craigslist who charged $25 an hour. He wasn't licensed, but had a good camera phone. I agreed to pay him to follow my wife during her lunch hours. His services were affordable since he only worked part-time. He also installed a GPS tracking app on his phone to see what I saw. I told him about the Best Eastern incident and showed him the location. Monday through Thursday were uneventful. Everything was routine. Then on Friday, the private investigator texted me that my wife was heading toward the Best Eastern. I opened the app to confirm. Knowing her destination, he arrived before her. When my wife got there, she entered the hotel alone. The investigator took photos and followed her inside. He knew her boss's appearance and car, so he was prepared. The investigator sat in the lobby and recorded my wife entering the elevator. He joined her in the elevator, a risky move that could have blown his cover. He saw her get off on the 3rd floor and recorded everything. He didn't follow her out but returned to the lobby and waited. About 3 hours later, her boss exited the elevator, checked out, and left. The investigator recorded it all. 10 minutes later, my wife came down, went to her car, and the investigator filmed this too. My suspicions were confirmed. She was cheating on me with her bald boss. I now had all the evidence I needed. The private investigator sent everything to my Dropbox. I compiled the evidence into one video and came home early before she did, with my laptop in the envelope I mentioned earlier. If you asked about my feelings at that moment, I'd say I felt surprisingly calm. as I had been mentally preparing myself for this confrontation. When she came home, I called her to the kitchen. My laptop was on the countertop, and I had put together a 30-minute video showing her arriving at the hotel, exiting the elevator, and her boss following shortly after, then her again. I played the video for her, and within 2 minutes she understood what it was about. She turned to me with an apologetic look and said, "I can explain." Tears filled her eyes as she repeated, "I'm sorry." I silenced her and pointed at the screen, urging her to keep watching. Despite her attempts to turn around and explain, even trying to get me to stop the video, my anger grew. I grabbed her by the back of her hair, forcing her to face the laptop. I harshly told her to keep watching, reminding her, "You know what you did." She cried softly and continued to watch, trembling. The fear in her eyes was evident. She had never seen me this furious before. I must clarify that I am not a violent person, and I had never laid a hand on her or any other woman like this before. But I made an exception that day. After the video ended, I forcefully pushed her to the floor, causing her to slide across the room. I felt a strong urge to physically harm her and yelled, accusing her of sleeping with her boss just 5 months into her new job and possibly with others. She cried, saying it was the only time she had cheated. When I asked how long it had been going on, she confessed it had been 2 months. She claimed she didn't care about him, that the sex meant nothing, and she couldn't explain why she did it. I demanded she start talking or I would resort to violence. She admitted everything, saying she wasn't genuinely attracted to him, but wanted him because other women did, like it was a competition. She mentioned he was involved with other women at work too. I couldn't believe my once beautiful wife was involved with this guy who resembled Gollum, just because other women were interested. It was like she forgot she was married while engaging with him and denying the intimacy. What kind of world were we living in? It seemed like she was with him more out of competition than anything else. I was extremely upset and words couldn't express it. The pristine image I had of my wife was tarnished. That night, I called her derogatory names and told her I didn't want to see her again. I kicked her out because I couldn't stand the sight of her, and she went to stay with a friend. The night was incredibly stressful. I had to feed and put the kids to bed, and I didn't know where anything was in the house. I was running around like a headless chicken, trying to resist calling my wife while my 5-year-old cried. She had always been the stay-at-home mom, more involved in our kids' lives, while I was the breadwinner. I thought we made a great team until now. She destroyed everything because she was trying to compete with other women, disregarding our marriage. According to her, the female employees working under her boss, Gollum, were throwing themselves at him, even those who were married. It was a competition among grown women, which baffled me. I suspected one of these women might have sent me that letter. Why would grown women compete for an unattractive troll-like man? This guy disgusted me, taking advantage of his female employees and turning their workplace into a disgraceful mess. I wanted a divorce, and for her to suffer the consequences of her betrayal. However, I had relied on her to maintain our home, so it would take some adjustment. My unfaithful wife had been texting and calling me since yesterday, seeking permission to return home. I didn't get much sleep and had to go to work. She knew where everything our kids needed was, including their medication. My 7-year-old daughter needed special attention due to allergies and being picky, which my wife was good at handling. My 5-year-old could also be challenging. I dropped them off at school and left work early to pick them up. It wasn't as bad as I expected, but I was quite tired. I hadn't responded to my wife's texts or calls. That evening, I called her back and told her to come home. When she arrived that night, she brought her older sister, perhaps out of fear of being alone with me. Her sister lives 90 miles away and must have come because my wife confided in her about the affair and sought her support. My sister-in-law married young, is now divorced, and looks so much like my wife they could be mistaken for twins, though she's 2 years older. We've always gotten along well. She's more knowledgeable and respectful than my wife. While I wasn't in the mood for reconciliation or playing nice with my wife, I was glad to see a friendly face. I thought my sister-in-law would always back her sister, but I appreciated her coming to mediate. My sister-in-law took me aside and explained she wasn't there for my wife but for the kids. She acknowledged my wife's immaturity and suggested that for the children's well-being, we needed to work things out. My sister-in-law suggested I let my wife back into the house and try an in-house separation to see how things would unfold. After our conversation, I have to admit that my sister-in-law has a knack for calming me down. I managed to tolerate my wife's presence. I glanced at my wife, who was sitting in the corner with a red face and swollen eyes, avoiding eye contact with me. It gave me some grim satisfaction to see she understood the impact of her betrayal. When our kids came out of their room and hugged her, the tension in the room eased a bit. It warmed my heart to see them happy, even though I wish she had stayed faithful. She was a wonderful mother, despite failing as a wife. Our 3-bedroom apartment meant my wife and her sister shared the guest bedroom while the kids stayed in their room. After putting the kids to bed, my wife came out and started cooking dinner. Meanwhile, I sat on the couch with my sister-in-law watching TV. She tried to distract me from the affair, chatting away and making everything seem normal. Deep down, I longed for things to go back to how they used to be. I was tired of being angry and exhausted from handling the kids and my job alone. Her sister's chatter was a welcome distraction. While my wife was in the kitchen, my sister-in-law mentioned she would leave the next morning but would stay longer if needed. I told her I was likely going to get a divorce because I couldn't look at my wife the same way or trust her anymore. She understood and didn't try to change my mind. After my wife finished cooking, she served us dinner without a word or eye contact. The next morning, my sister-in-law left, and we carried on with our daily routine. I still wasn't speaking to my wife, and she didn't seem to be getting ready for work, but I didn't ask about it. That afternoon, I consulted a divorce lawyer to explore my options. The lawyer mentioned that I might have to pay alimony and child support based on my wife's income. It seemed ridiculous because she only earned $45,000 a year and had cheated with her boss. Cheating with a superior is unacceptable, especially in a committed relationship. Maybe her newfound financial independence, being her first job since college, played a role in her actions. Regardless, she had gone too far. Providing alimony and child support wasn't the issue. I had essentially done that during my military service when I earned less. It was about principle. If she could cheat on me with her first career boss, what would stop her from doing the same with another person in authority in the future? When I got home that night, I spoke to my wife for the first time since discovering the affair. She had written a letter and wanted to read it to me, hoping to express her thoughts without breaking down. As she read, she kept apologizing for betraying my trust and acting immaturely, avoiding any mention of her boss. She expressed her desire to stay together and her willingness to do anything to fix our marriage. Surprisingly, she also said I could sleep with other women if I wanted to. This shocked me, as she had always been jealous. I doubted her sincerity and told her I didn't need her permission to be with other women because she had lost the right to have an opinion on that matter. I believed she was trying to manipulate me and alleviate her guilt. I interrupted her and clarified that I had no interest in being with other women. If I did, I wouldn't have married her. She burst into tears, but I insisted she hadn't explained why she deceived me for 2 months. It wasn't a one-time mistake. It was premeditated and deliberate. She planned the hotel meetups and carried on a secret affair with this disgusting guy, risking so much for what? I told her we were getting a divorce and my mind was made up. I added that despite her physical attractiveness, I couldn't bear to sleep with her or have her near me. She kept asking, "Why are you being so cruel to me?" I had treated her like a princess throughout our relationship, never raising my voice, always pampering her, letting her make all the rules at home, and giving her control over our household. She had grown accustomed to it. Maybe that's why she ended up with the first guy who ordered her around, thinking I would stay the same nice guy even after she had an affair with her boss. It's unbelievable, and there's more. She also told me she had quit her job because she couldn't stand seeing her boss's face. She said she had everything with me, but threw it away because she wanted to fit in with her coworkers. She claimed she wasn't sure how it had escalated to a sexual relationship. Despite my disgust, I couldn't shake the question of how a guy who looked like Gollum could seduce a beautiful woman like my wife and make her forget her vows. I kept questioning her, wanting to know why she fell for him. She stumbled over her words, admitting she was grappling with the same question herself, trying to understand why she got involved and why she kept going back. She emphasized that it wasn't even about the sex. She sarcastically remarked that it certainly wasn't about his looks. The only explanation she could offer was a mix of factors. He was articulate, always had the right response, and his position of authority made him more attractive because all the girls looked up to him and tried to impress him. The explanations she provided were well thought out, but all I could focus on was how much I wanted to disrupt Gollum's life. I informed my wife that I intended to expose him. Despite our impending divorce, she was willing to do anything to make amends, unable to bear my anger and disappointment. I told her I wanted to reveal his actions to his wife. Although she had been foolish to let this man manipulate her, he needed to be held accountable for wrecking our family. My wife gave me his address and his wife's name. When I asked how they had communicated, without leaving traces, she admitted they used her work email messenger. I demanded she log in and show me the messages. She hesitated, fearing it would only make me angrier and that I might harm her if I saw the content. Despite my persistence, she insisted that she would show me the messages after our divorce was finalized and we were separated. A few days later, I managed to find Gollum's wife. For context, Gollum was 51 years old and his wife was 48. I conducted a background check to confirm their address. They had 4 children, the youngest being 12. I made an extra copy of the video evidence and saved it on a thumb drive. I decided to visit their house while Gollum was likely still at work, probably preying on another employee. I knocked on the door, and his wife answered. She was the only one home. I explained my situation and handed her the flash drive containing the evidence and the anonymous letter I had received. She revealed she had received a similar letter and confronted her husband, who denied everything, claiming the women at work were lazy and resented him for making them do their jobs. He convinced her that his colleagues were out to ruin his reputation. She had believed him and never thought to hire a private investigator. Gollum's wife was grateful for the information I provided and took my contact details. She thanked me for my service to the country, and we said our goodbyes. I don't know if they divorced, but at least he knew I was on to him. Last week, I submitted all my evidence to the HR department. I spoke with a woman on the phone who invited me to visit in person. During my visit, I provided another flash drive and a statement from my wife admitting her affair as the reason for her resignation. I hoped this would be enough to get him fired. Before leaving, I decided to confront Gollum. After exiting the lobby, I went to the dock area where the trucks unloaded. Security was lax, and a side door was unlocked, allowing me to slip inside. I asked an employee for directions to Gollum's office. As I walked through the warehouse, I noticed most of the workers were female, including the forklift operators. It seemed like the company preferred hiring women. I saw Gollum coming out of his office about 50 feet away. I called his name, and he turned to see who I was. He probably assumed I was a truck driver. As I got closer, I didn't say a word. Instead, I delivered a right hook, knocking him out with one punch. Then I calmly walked out. I glanced back as I reached the exit, seeing a small crowd gather around him as he started to come to. I opened the door and left the building. Yesterday, 2 police officers knocked on my door. They questioned me about the assault at my wife's former workplace. Gollum had identified me as a suspect and wanted to press charges. Although security footage captured me, the description was unclear because I wore a hat. They asked for my alibi, and I said I was home with my wife. They wanted to speak with her, so I called her. She didn't know about the assault, but quickly caught on and supported my alibi. I'm not sure if the police believed us, but they took pictures of our cars and my contact information, saying they'd follow up if needed. I had made a huge mistake, and it was hard to believe that Gollum, who had an affair with my wife, had the nerve to call the cops on me. Fortunately, word spread quickly, and one of the women he had harassed filed sexual harassment charges against him. This might have been encouraged by HR's investigation and my confrontation. HR questioned the women, who finally told the truth. It turned out he had been coercing many of his female employees for sexual favors. Most had refused, but those who complied did so out of fear or intimidation. It was a complex situation, similar to the Harvey Weinstein scandal, where some women initially engaged with him to advance their careers, but later portrayed themselves as victims. Despite the mess, I was pleased with the outcome. I heard he was fired the next day. My wife kept in touch with some colleagues, so I can't be sure if it's accurate. A few days later, I called Gollum's wife to check on her. She said they were separated and he no longer lived with them. She also told me that multiple women had filed charges against him. After confronting him with the evidence I provided, he confessed to having relations only with my wife, though it's hard to believe, given the multiple charges against him. This didn't bring me comfort. In fact, I would have preferred if there were other women involved. It would have made more sense than just my wife. It's baffling what she gained from all this. I'm left questioning my judgment for choosing her as my wife in the first place. If she could engage in such behavior so easily, it makes me wonder if she was ever faithful during my military deployments. Writing this now, I feel utterly devastated and depressed. I've been reading numerous posts about surviving infidelity to find some solace and assurance that I'm not alone. I also spoke with my brother, who suggested seeking help from a therapist given my current mental state. The VA covers various medical expenses, including therapy, so it wouldn't be a financial burden. Nevertheless, I'm hesitant and uncomfortable about confiding in a stranger, even a trained professional. Yet here I am, sharing my story with a group of strangers online. Somehow it feels therapeutic to share and receive advice from anonymous individuals, gaining different perspectives and reading their comments. I'm still living in the same house as my wife, but we now occupy separate bedrooms. Her sister has been visiting more frequently, and things appear to be returning to a semblance of normalcy. My wife has been making every effort to keep me happy. Despite this, we haven't been intimate since D-Day, and I have no desire to engage with her in that way. I've been procrastinating when it comes to pursuing a divorce, recognizing that the longer I wait, the more comfortable I become with her playing the role of wife and mother again. Initially, I thought my wife might be inviting her sister over to help improve our relationship since she knows I get along well with her. However, it turns out my sister-in-law is considering moving closer to us on her own accord. With her kids nearly grown and her youngest about to enter college, she's looking to live nearby. We have plenty of family around, including my parents, who are aware of the marital issues but not the specifics. Despite everything, my parents still hope we can work things out for the sake of the kids. A few weeks later, my sister-in-law secured a job close to our area and moved here. My wife and I continue to live under the same roof, but sleep in separate bedrooms. Essentially, we're roommates now, and I've consistently declined my wife's attempts at intimacy. While it's challenging to go without sex for an extended period, my military experience taught me self-control. My sister-in-law has been visiting more frequently, and it seems she's more interested in spending time with me than with her sister or the kids. My wife noticed this and confronted her. I found out later that my sister-in-law started visiting less often without explaining why. My wife tends to be jealous, so her reaction didn't surprise me. It might be for the best because I was beginning to develop feelings for my sister-in-law. Despite having a long-standing attraction to her, I never acted on it because I was married to her younger sister. I was torn between reconciling with my wife or pursuing a divorce. However, I'm increasingly inclined towards the idea of divorce. Reconciliation seems impossible because I can't bring myself to trust her again. Trust is crucial in any relationship, and I can't share a bed with someone I can't trust. She had a 2-month affair and denied me intimacy during that time, which in my view is unforgivable. My wife believes there's a chance for reconciliation, and I've noticed she's been trying hard to seduce me. She started wearing seductive lace nightgowns around the house, often without underwear or a bra. I know she's trying to love bomb me and use her charm, and unfortunately, she knows my weaknesses. One night, her efforts worked. We ended up having an intimate encounter in the kitchen. Here's how it unfolded. I was grabbing something from the refrigerator, perhaps a beer, and as I walked by, I saw her leaning on the kitchen counter, preparing fruits for the kids' school lunches. She was wearing a transparent lace robe, with no panties or bra. I tried hard to resist, but couldn't. The sight of her had already gotten me aroused. As she leaned on the counter, I approached her from behind, placed my hands on her hips, and pulled her towards me. I gently moved her into a standing position, lifted her lace robe, and things escalated. It was probably the most intense encounter we've ever had. It wasn't the slow romantic lovemaking we usually had. It was raw and driven by pent-up desires. I noticed she reached climax more quickly and responded more intensely than ever before. I'm not sure if it was my imagination, but her reaction was unlike anything I'd seen in our 10 years together. During our marriage, our intimacy had always been slow and tender, nothing aggressive or rough. We only stopped because she was getting too loud, and the kids were starting to hear her and come out of their rooms. I was still in a daze when the kids interrupted us, and instead of suggesting we continue in the bedroom, I went to the bathroom to finish alone. Last night's encounter revealed something new about my wife that I wasn't aware of. She enjoys rough and aggressive intimacy. This revelation was surprising because I thought I knew everything about her. Before meeting her, I had limited experience with women and remained faithful throughout our marriage. It felt like I had married a stranger. In our usual marital intimacy, I let her take the lead, paying close attention to her desires. I've read books on how to please a woman, and most of them emphasize listening to her body's cues. Even the late Bernie Mac joked about that in his comedy skit. I realized I had been engaging in conventional sex throughout our marriage, which might not have been what she truly desired. Last night, I took control and did what I wanted, disregarding her preferences, and surprisingly, she responded with more passion and intensity than ever before. She responded with such intensity, reaching climax faster than ever before. This left me troubled, wondering what else I didn't know about my wife. I began to question if her infidelity was somehow my fault. Maybe if I had been more assertive and dominant in bed, she wouldn't have been tempted by the first guy who took control. Perhaps she craved something I had never given her. All the marriage advice I had read seemed useless, as it didn't apply to her. Last night, her body seemed to respond to my dominant approach, and it made me realize that my gentle, attentive style might have been missing the mark. Maybe she needed someone to take charge. I'd always been taught to be polite and gentle with my wife, likely influenced by the same conservative teachings my priest followed. But now, I wondered if her infidelity was due to my ignorance of her true desires. I really wanted guidance but had no one to turn to. On the outside, I might look like the tough, aggressive military guy, but with my wife, I had become soft and gentle, letting her control our household and finances. It's becoming clear that I relinquished my power in this marriage, both inside and outside the bedroom. Recognizing these shortcomings is crucial, because if I don't, I risk making the same mistakes in future relationships. Even though the spontaneous, intimate encounter with my wife was a mistake, it opened my eyes to our relationship dynamics. I now believe that my failure to assert myself allowed her to explore being controlled by someone else. It's possible this wasn't her first experience of this kind. Some people suggested I should get an STD test and consider paternity tests for my children, which seemed like good advice. My kids look a lot like me, so it's hard to believe they aren't mine. I used to be sure my wife was faithful while I was in the military, but now I'm not so certain. These past few weeks have shown me how little I knew. Without that letter, she might still be involved with Gollum. I wonder if his assertiveness was part of what attracted her to him. Yesterday, I took an STD test and thankfully, the results were negative. I also decided to go ahead with the paternity tests. I collected saliva swabs from my 3 children without my wife knowing. The results will take about 4 weeks. I'm not overly worried because the timing of their conception matches when I was home. We lived in on-base housing provided for married service members. As for an update, there's not much to report right now. I'm still contemplating divorce. My lawyer has drafted the separation agreement, and it turns out I will have to pay her alimony. This won't be much different from our current setup, as I've been supporting her financially since she was a stay-at-home mom. We're on speaking terms, but sleep in separate bedrooms, living more like roommates. We haven't been intimate since that encounter in the kitchen. She's been trying to win me back, but I've been avoiding her, staying out late, hanging with friends after work, and sometimes not even coming home. She calls to check on me, but I don't answer. She can tell I'm emotionally distant and feels that I've checked out of the marriage. I should have started the divorce process weeks ago, but I'm hesitant because I don't like change. I'm also worried about managing my demanding job while sharing custody of the children. When we do separate, I plan to aim for a 70/30 custody arrangement so I can spend more time with the kids. I love my children and cherish our time together. They often prefer to be with me because I spoil them with gifts and am more lenient, while my wife is the disciplinarian. I sometimes hide the gifts to avoid her disapproval, though she usually finds them. I am the primary breadwinner, and she has been the homemaker, a setup that has worked for me. The police haven't contacted me yet about the assault, and I hope it stays that way. I've heard that a civil case has been filed against Gollum, but I don't know if he's in jail or what his situation is. Apparently, before I stepped in, none of the women thought reporting him to HR for sexual harassment would be effective. I guess my actions gave them the courage to stand up against him. Yesterday, I received the paternity test results, and they confirmed that all 3 kids are indeed mine. That was a huge relief. It looks like I'll be proceeding with the divorce. As mentioned earlier, I don't mind financially supporting my wife. I informed her beforehand that I would serve her with divorce papers, and she cried, but she understands there's no turning back. Despite the pain she caused me, I wish her well. She'll find someone else soon because she's still very attractive. But it's over for us. Before serving her, we discussed her future. She mentioned getting a part-time teaching job to keep busy. We agreed I'd provide her with $3,000 per month, including child support, so the money will be for her and the kids. I've heard it might not be wise to avoid the legal system, but I have reservations about more government involvement in my paycheck. We finalized the divorce agreement with our lawyers present. It was amicable, and I hold no grudge against her. She regrets her actions and took responsibility. I've forgiven her for the kids' sake, but I'll never trust her again. I recently found a nice 2-bedroom apartment in a good area. There are plenty of beautiful women around, and I never had the chance to date since my wife was the only woman I'd been with. Asking a girl out feels daunting because I never learned how to date, but I'm still an attractive guy, and women do notice me, so I'm optimistic. One more thing. My sister-in-law has been visiting my apartment more often now that I'm not living with my wife. It's clear she's attracted to me, and we've been spending more time together. I don't know where this is headed, but I'm not interested in dating her, and I think she understands that. Nonetheless, we both enjoy each other's company.